I wanted to discuss the real reason that you should get a concussion baseline test. So we're going to break down 3 things around it. So we're going to talk about the myth of concussion baseline testing, and knowing this might make you want to actually get a baseline test. We're going to talk about a quality baseline test and what you should look for when you're getting one. And then we're going to talk about how that quality baseline test should actually be used, the real reason you should get a baseline test. Hey there, I'm Dr. Mark. I've worked with concussion almost exclusively for the past 5 years, and in that time I've cleared over 500 people from their concussions. So on this channel, we talk about concussion rehab, getting over your symptoms and getting you back to work, school, sport, or just your regular life. Today I wanted to talk to my contact athletes, my parents, my coaches, my people involved in contact sports. Let's get into it. So there's been a significant and growing concern around head contacts, head impacts in contact sports, repetitive head impacts, big head impacts. We just don't want it. And so naturally, we're trying to make changes and do things to improve player safety. So as an example, in this 2024 NFL season, we've seen the NFL eliminate the hip drop tackle. We've seen them change kickoff rules. And the whole idea here is, can we minimize how many times we expose a player to a compromising or high risk situation? And if we can do that less chance of getting hit means less chance of concussion. So we should see numbers go down. And that is a great thing. That is one of the few things we see in the research around concussion prevention that actually does lower concussion numbers. But the one thing we know for certain is in sports or not, even if you're not a contact athlete, we will never 100% prevent concussions. And so the next best thing, if you're a high risk contact athlete, if you're a hockey player, a football player, a rugby player, lacrosse, soccer, the next best thing is to try to be as prepared as possible should you sustain a concussion. On the off chance that you do sustain a concussion, no one plans for it, but we know that 10 to 30% of all sports-related injuries in high school and college sports are concussions. So said differently, if your team has 10 injuries, 1 to 3 of those injuries are going to be concussions. So no one plans for it, but if it happens, are you as prepared as you can be for a fast, robust, safe recovery? And that's where the baseline test comes in. All right, so let's knock out a myth here early, and that is that your preseason concussion baseline test is used for the diagnosis of your concussion later in the season, if you have one. No, concussion diagnosis in sports is actually way more straightforward than you would think. You got someone on the sideline. You have an athletic trainer, a physical therapist, someone on the sideline there to address and manage sports injuries, including concussions. And the reason I say it's pretty straightforward is you just need a mechanism of injury and you need symptoms. So if you saw a player get hit, they took a funny shoulder or head hit or direct head to head or ball to head or head to floor or something like that. If you saw some sort of hit where you were concerned about a concussion and you pulled them aside and they had symptoms on the post-concussion symptom scale, even 1, that's enough to remove them from play and suspect a concussion. When in doubt, sit out if you're not sure. And if you have a head impact and you have new symptoms, you got to suspect a concussion and pull them out. Ultimately, if you're pulling someone away like that, you're reevaluating them in 24 to 48 hours to confirm the diagnosis and begin a rehab plan. And on that sideline, you're ruling out red flags to make sure you don't got to send them to the ER. But that's the process: mechanism of injury and symptoms. The only time you use a baseline test in the context of concussion diagnosis is if it's tricky. The hit seems funny, the player's certain that those symptoms are not related to the hit, they're fine, they want to get back to play, it's a high stakes game, yada, yada, yada. There's multiple factors and you're just not sure. That's when you need the baseline test. That's when the baseline test is really most useful in making a concussion diagnosis. So a quick side to kind of make this more nuanced. Some people argue against baseline testing, and that could be a whole different video because almost every single major governing sports medicine body, including those that made the international consensus statement, everyone's kind of in favor of doing preseason concussion baseline tests. Let's find out what these kids and these athletes' healthy normals are before an injury, so that after an injury, we know if they were here and now they're here, something happened and we can rehab them back, right? So for those against it, how about this? So let's kind of wet the palate. Let's prepare you to kind of maybe come over to the baseline testing side of things. There was a 2023 study that showed about 30% of club collegiate athletes reported symptoms at baseline on that post-concussion symptom scale. And so we found that women, folks with a history of concussion, those with ADD and ADHD, all tended to report more sort of higher baseline symptoms. And so the question that arises here is, if we have to have a suspected mechanism of injury and symptoms to suspect concussion, are the symptoms reported after the impact actually normal for these people or not? Are we unnecessarily removing someone from play because we don't know their baseline symptom status? So without these baseline tests, we don't know. And there's more research kind of where that came from, where we're finding that you versus you, 1-to-1, kind of N equals 1, this athlete compared to that same athlete, that sort of data is most helpful, and you only get that from baseline testing. So what makes a good baseline test? We know that baseline testing is really only used for the diagnosis of concussion in tricky cases, but we also know that nearly every major governing sports medicine body is saying, hey, athletes should get baseline testing. So what makes a good baseline test? For starters, when you hear baseline test, you might think, oh, it's just a test. It's not just a test. It's tests plural. So it's more kind of aptly thought of as like a protocol or a procedure. And the idea is we're going to collect numerous data points to kind of capture your unique, uninjured physical, mental, and emotional health and status and performance. And so if you're going to a complete concussions clinic, like my office is a complete concussions clinic. So if you go to my office or any other office in the network, we're going to capture a medical history and a concussion history, get psych, meds, symptoms, all that stuff. So medical history, concussion history, a symptom score. And then we're going to use the SCAT, so the Sport Concussion Assessment Tool, as a baseline. And we're going to get neurocognitive metrics like your orientation, your auditory memory, your concentration, delayed recall, things like that. And that's where most standard organizations are going to stop. You're going to get a SCAT, so around the 6th edition, you're going to get a SCAT 6. And maybe if they're fancy and they're good, you're going to get an IMPACT, which is a computerized neurocognitive test. Now, in my office and certified complete concussions clinics, we're also going to capture visual tracking and processing speed. We're going to get computerized balance and postural sway. And we're also going to get computerized reaction time. So both simple, discriminative, and choice reaction time. That's fancy, but just know that we're getting reaction time. And this is actually what makes a good baseline test. Because if we look at the SCAT by itself, which is what a lot of people are getting, if we look at the SCAT by itself, that normalizes within about a week. And that's whether you're normal or not. And what we know from concussion pathophysiology is that concussion metabolism takes around 3 to 4 weeks to normalize, to go back to control, to go back to baseline. And so if the SCAT 6 is normalizing within about a week, but your concussion doesn't normalize for 3 to 4 weeks, it's not really all that useful. And then the other thing is IMPACT. If you have the baseline, great. But if you don't, what a lot of people end up doing is they'll go to a concussion clinic and they run an IMPACT for the neurocognitive assessment. And if you're running off of normative data, just normal values for boys age 5 to 7, 10 to 12, whatever, those data, those normative data are about as good as flipping a coin. So you really want to have an athlete's pre and post. If you only have a SCAT, after a week, it's not really that useful. It's kind of useless. That's why visual processing speed, balance, and reaction time are great, because visual processing speed only normalizes when you do. Balance only normalizes when you do. Reaction time only normalizes when you do. So without getting into the nitty-gritty of every single test that we do in a baseline, just talking about reaction time, we know that deficits will peak in about 3 days, meaning your reaction time is going to be at slowest about 3 days after the injury, and then it's going to recover in about 21 to 59 days. That doesn't mean it's going to take 59 days to recover. It just means the reaction time might be delayed for up to 59 days, and it's only going to normalize. Your reaction time is only going to be back to normal when you are. So these last metrics are wildly sport specific, and these metrics, recovery time, balance, visual processing, reaction time, those recovery times, they only go back to normal when you go back to normal. And so that leads us to what baseline tests actually do, what they're actually used for. So at the beginning of the season, you might spend $60 to $100. You're going to spend 30 minutes in a doctor's office. They should run you through a SCAT 6. They should do timed visual processing speed assessment. They should do computerized neurocognitive assessment that includes reaction time, and they should do computerized balance and postural sway. And if you do that and you sustain a concussion, we've now got you versus you data to compare yourself with for recovery and return to play. That's the game. That's the purpose of baseline testing. We've now got data that lasts longer than a week if there's an injury, and we've got data that only normalizes when you do, and it's specific to you. So I've been echoing that kind of this whole video, but why is that important? Why is you versus you important? Why is it important that it's specific to you? Let's use a balance example. So follow me on this. When we measure balance on the computerized, so you would hold your phone, computerized, you would hold your phone and it measures sway. So 0% is you drop the phone or you fall over. 100% is you set the phone on the counter and I know you cheated. You're as stoic as a statue. And then everywhere in between there is kind of measuring your sway. And so what we know is that from the sway testing, we know that normative values, the median is about 98%. People are pretty stable with 2 feet on the ground. They don't sway all that much. From 10 to 18 years or 5 to 18 years old, we see the median value is roughly 98%. So let's say, scenario here, if your uninjured, healthy, pre-season double leg balance is 80%, and that's just how you perform, and we don't know that, we might be waiting to get you back to a balance score of like 98%, but we don't know that your normal is 80, and we don't clear you, and we're unnecessarily holding you back from sport. And that is a real example that I've done with someone where we didn't have baseline testing, and it wasn't until I talked with the strength and conditioning coach that we found out this, ironically, this hockey player had really bad balance. And so we actually got him up to like 86. And then I was like, I don't know, that seems to be as good as we're going to get. And then we finally chatted with his coach and he's like, oh, no. That's probably better than what he's at before. And we didn't know that because we didn't have baseline tests, right? So on the flip side, maybe your balance, your double leg balance is 98%. It's good. It's at the top. That's where we want it for most 10 to 18 year old people. We might actually clear you too early by assuming that a 91% is close enough. 91% actually puts you in the bottom 10% of 5-year-olds. So having this you versus you data lets us know know when you perform like you, when you are actually ready to return to play. So let's say we use the SCAT-6 and we clear you in a week. We actually just put you at risk of a potentially severe second impact, another second injury, because we went too soon. We didn't know that you were actually performing like you because the SCAT normalizes in a week anyway. So to repeat, to echo, to summarize, the true purpose of concussion baseline testing is to ensure the most complete and safe recovery and return to play for you as possible. So if it's preseason when you're watching this and you haven't made it to a complete concussions clinic, or you haven't downloaded the concussion tracker app, which is free, to do your neurocognitive and your balance testing and find a clinic near you, what are you waiting for? Do it. It is the most simple thing that you can do to ensure the safest and most robust recovery possible if you do sustain a concussion during your season. All right, I appreciate you sticking around. If you enjoyed or learned something from this video, you might also enjoy or learn something from these other videos. Until next time, I'm Dr. Mark. Thank you for watching.